The obsidian palace rose like a shadow against the dying light of the crimson sky. Its black spires pierced the clouds, and the wind carried whispers of old magic, of kings and queens long forgotten, and of curses that had never fully lifted. Within its cold halls, twin sisters Celine and Lyra moved like twin shadows themselves, so alike that only those who knew them well could tell them apart. Yet while they shared appearances, their hearts and fates were already drifting down different paths. Lyra was radiant that evening, preparing for a wedding that would cement the alliance of kingdoms. Her laughter echoed through the corridors, a melody meant to charm the court and please the gods. She was to marry Kale, the Alpha King, whose name alone sent tremors through neighboring lands. His presence was commanding, like the calm before a storm, and many feared him. Few dared to approach, and fewer still had survived the storm of his temper. Selene, though identical in face and voice, felt apart from the festivities. She wandered the palace gardens under the light of a crescent moon, her hands brushing against the petals of night-blooming flowers. There was a strange energy in the air, as if the shadows themselves were whispering secrets only she could hear. Her heart tightened as she imagined her sister smiling at Kyle, accepting the life that destiny had handed her. But beneath that smile, Celine felt a pull toward the king she could not explain, a connection that was forbidden yet undeniable. Kale moved through the palace with an air of authority that silenced even the boldest courtiers. His eyes, dark as storm clouds, held a depth that seemed to see beyond appearances, beyond intentions. Celine had glimpsed them before from afar and felt a shiver pass through her. She had always believed that loyalty and duty mattered more than desire, yet she could not deny the strange magnetism of the king. He was bound to her sister by law, by tradition, and by the weight of prophecy. But Celine sensed that there was more, something that even the ancient texts had not fully revealed. On the eve of the wedding, the palace hummed with quiet tension. Servants moved like shadows along marble floors, carrying torches whose flames flickered against the dark walls. Celine slipped into one of the palace towers, seeking solitude, her thoughts heavy with longing and dread. She found herself at a small balcony, overlooking the gardens where moonlight danced on the fountain's waters. The air smelled of jasmine and old stone, and the silence pressed against her like a living thing. "You should not be here," a voice said, calm yet commanding. Selena turned sharply to see Kale standing in the shadows, as if he had appeared from the darkness itself. His presence was immediate, undeniable. He was not smiling, but there was a softness in his gaze that made her heart beat faster. I needed air," Selene said, her voice barely above a whisper. She did not move, though a part of her longed to flee. "Air is plentiful in the palace," Kale replied, stepping closer. "But peace is rare." His eyes searched hers as if seeking the truth behind her carefully controlled expressions. "Why do you look at this night as if it holds answers?" Celine hesitated. To speak the truth would betray both her sister and herself, yet remaining silent felt like denying her own heartbeat. I do not know," she admitted. "I only know that something calls me and I cannot refuse it." Kyle's gaze softened and he moved a step closer, so near that the cool breeze of the night seemed to flow between them. "The heart often speaks what the mind fears," he said. "But not all hearts can be trusted with the truth. Yours, perhaps it can." Celine's breath caught. The words felt like a key turning in a lock she had not even realized existed. She wanted to speak, to ask the questions that had burned in her chest for years. Yet the weight of the wedding, of her sister, of the ancient laws held her tongue. "Do you fear me?" Kyle asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Or do you fear what I might see in you?" Celine looked away toward the moonlit fountain, her hands clenched at her sides. I do not know," she admitted again, though the truth was deeper. She feared nothing more than the pull of her own heart. Kale nodded as if he understood completely. And in that moment, the air between them thickened with unspoken recognition. He bent slightly and, in a gesture that shocked her, bowed his head before her. Not in mockery, not in formality, but in acknowledgement, an act of respect and something closer to reverence. "I see you," he said simply. The words seemed to linger in the night air, heavy with promise and danger. Celine's heart trembled, her pulse echoing in her ears. She wanted to respond, to step forward, yet she remained rooted to the balcony. Outside, the night seemed to hold its breath, the stars flickering like tiny witnesses to a truth no one else could yet understand. "See me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Cale's gaze did not waver. Not the mask you show the world, nor the sister the palace expects. I see the strength beneath, the heart that does not bend to fear, the courage that is ready to choose even when every law says otherwise. Celine felt a surge of emotion she could not name. Relief, fear, longing, and wonder all intertwined, leaving her almost dizzy. The pull between them was undeniable, dangerous yet necessary. She had always believed that her path was to follow her sister, to step behind Lyra and remain unseen. But the truth of her own heart now challenged everything she had known. Cale straightened, giving her a final, lingering look. "The night is not long," he said. "Soon duty will demand what hearts might prefer. Choose wisely, Celine, for even shadows can burn when they meet the light." He turned and vanished into the corridors, leaving her alone on the balcony. Celine's fingers brushed the cold stone railing, but her mind was far away, caught between loyalty and desire, between sisterly love and the forbidden pull of a king's gaze. As the moon dipped lower and the first stars faded, Celine descended the tower steps, her steps silent but determined. She knew that tomorrow would be the day her sister became a queen, and the same day her own life would be forever changed. Every step she took felt like walking a tightrope stretched across history, across loyalty, and across a heart that refused to remain silent. The palace itself seemed to hold its breath as the night deepened. Somewhere in the shadows, whispers of the past stirred, of prophecies, of curses, and of a king whose heart could only be claimed by a love born from choice, not duty. Celine felt the weight of destiny pressing upon her shoulders. Her life, once simple and measured, now teetered on the edge of storms she could neither fully predict nor control. And in that fragile moment of solitude, as the first light of dawn began to touch the spires of the obsidian palace, Celine realized a truth that both thrilled and terrified her. The Alpha King's gaze had found her, and in finding her, had begun a chain of events that would change everything. Her sister, the kingdom, and her own heart. The wedding was only hours away, and yet Celine could not sleep. The palace, the kingdom, and even the stars seemed to conspire to remind her that life as she knew it was ending. She would have to navigate the treacherous waters of love, power, and loyalty, where every choice could bring triumph or ruin, and most importantly, she would have to face the impossible, the knowledge that her heart no longer belonged entirely to her. Cliffhanger. As dawn broke and the palace stirred to life, Celine heard the faintest sound of movement behind her. She turned sharply, expecting a servant or a guard, but instead found Cale standing at the edge of the garden, watching her with those storm-dark eyes. And in that gaze she saw more than curiosity or duty. She saw recognition, longing, and a promise that defied every law she had ever known. Her pulse quickened. The day of the wedding had begun, but Celine knew in her heart that nothing, neither law nor blood nor prophecy, would be the same again. The morning of the wedding dawned gray and heavy, as if the sky itself sensed the tension within the walls of the obsidian palace. Courtiers moved in hushed whispers, their fine silks brushing against the cold marble floors while the twin sisters prepared for the day that would change everything. Lyra's laughter rang out, bright and clear, masking the nervous flutter in her chest. She had been raised for this moment, trained to smile and obey, to charm the court and win the favor of the Alpha King. Celine remained in the shadows, watching her sister from the tower balcony. She could see the golden light falling on Lyra's hair, the delicate folds of her dress shimmering like spun sunlight. And yet, even amidst the beauty and ceremony, Celine felt the strange pull in her chest, the pull toward Cale. She remembered his words from the night before, his bow, his gaze that saw her, truly saw her. And now, on the day when her sister would become a queen, that pull was stronger than ever. Cale appeared suddenly in the courtyard below, moving like a shadow among the courtly splendor. He was dressed in ceremonial armor, dark as midnight, trimmed with silver that caught the early light. His presence silenced murmurs, and even the bravest courtiers bowed in respect. But when his eyes met Celine's across the courtyard, a small shift passed between them, a recognition that did not belong to the public eye. He did not move toward her. That would be impossible, not yet. But the intensity of his gaze lingered, and Celine felt her heart quicken. The ceremony began in the great hall, a place of black stone and gilded murals depicting ancient kings and queens. Candles flickered along the walls, their flames reflecting the anxiety and anticipation in the faces of those present. Lyra walked down the aisle with perfect poise, her smile unwavering, though Celine could see the small tremor in her hands. Kayla waited at the altar, standing tall and silent, a living embodiment of power. He bowed his head slightly as Lyra approached, a gesture of respect. Yet Celine noticed the subtle tension in his shoulders, a rigidity that seemed almost unnatural. As the vows were spoken, Celine felt her chest tighten. Every word of the ceremony felt like a knife twisting in the quiet of her soul. Lyra's voice was steady, her words meant to bind herself to Kale forever. But Celine's mind wandered to the king's gaze, to the moment stolen in moonlit gardens, to the words that had left her breathless the night before. She knew that Kale's heart, though bound by duty, might not be as certain as the ceremony intended. Kale spoke his vows with precision and authority, each word heavy with the weight of expectation. And yet, when his gaze found Celine, even for a moment a flicker of something unspoken passed through the hall. The air seemed to hum with electricity, a quiet promise that no one else could understand. Celine's pulse thudded in her ears and she felt the walls of tradition and duty press in from all sides. After the ceremony, the hall erupted in celebration. Courtiers drank and laughed and musicians played lively tunes. Lyra was radiant, the center of attention, moving gracefully among her guests. Celine lingered on the edges, silent and careful, yet her eyes continually found Kale. He moved through the crowd with controlled ease, offering smiles that were polite but distant, yet in private moments his eyes sought hers, reminding her of the bond that neither law nor ceremony could erase. Later, in the gardens behind the palace, Celine found herself wandering again, drawn by the need for solitude. The moon had risen once more, painting the fountains and marble paths in silver light. She felt a presence before she saw it. Kale emerged from the shadows, his dark armor catching the moonlight, his expression unreadable. "You should not be wandering alone," he said, his voice low and calm. Celine did not respond immediately. Her heart still raced from the morning's events. "The celebration, it feels hollow," she admitted finally. "Everything is perfect on the surface, but underneath, I do not know if anyone sees the truth." Kale stepped closer, and for the first time that day, he allowed a faint softness to enter his eyes. "The world often values ceremony over truth," he said. "But truth has a way of revealing itself, even in the midst of celebration. You feel it, do you not?" Celine nodded, unable to hide the tremor in her voice. "I feel like something I cannot name, something that does not belong to the law, or the ceremony, or even to my sister. And yet it is here, pulling me toward you." Kyle's gaze darkened with intensity. "And I feel it as well," he admitted. "Though I am bound by duty and law, my heart recognizes yours. That recognition, it cannot be ignored, no matter the cost." The confession hung between them, fragile and dangerous. Celine's mind raced with questions. Could love exist in such a world of duty and expectation? Could she, who had always obeyed and protected, dare to hope for something forbidden? And what of her sister, whose happiness she had vowed to safeguard? Kale reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. The touch was electric, gentle, and terrifying all at once. "You must be careful," he warned. "Even the smallest misstep could destroy everything. For you, for your sister, for the kingdom. And yet, I cannot let this moment pass without telling you the truth." Celine's breath caught. "The truth?" she whispered. "Yes," Kale said, "that you are not merely a witness to these events. You are part of the story, a story that will shape the fate of the kingdom, of your sister, and of us both. I do not ask you to act against your sister, but you must be aware. The bond between us exists, and it cannot be denied." Celine felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She had spent her life in the shadow of her sister, never daring to hope for attention, for recognition, for love. And now, in this moonlit garden, the impossible had become real. Before she could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed along the marble paths. They froze, the tension between them unbroken but vulnerable. From the shadows emerged Lyra, radiant and unaware, yet her gaze flicked to Celine and Kale with a momentary pause that Celine could not read. Kale stepped back, masking his presence with the authority of the Alpha King. "Enjoy the celebration," he said softly, and disappeared into the night. Leaving Celine trembling and unsure, Lyra approached, smiling, and took Celine's hand in a gesture of sisterly warmth. "It is almost time for the feast," she said. Come, let us celebrate. Tonight is the night we will remember forever. Selene nodded, but her heart was heavy. She followed her sister, walking through corridors adorned with banners and torches, past courtiers who smiled and whispered. Every step felt like walking a tightrope between loyalty and desire, between duty and truth. As the feast began, Selene observed the room carefully. Cale moved among the guests, charming yet distant, his eyes occasionally flicking toward her. The court noticed nothing, but Selene felt the undercurrent of tension, the unspoken bond that threatened to overturn the delicate balance of power. Every smile Cale offered another, every polite nod, carried a weight she alone seemed to understand. By the time the evening deepened, the palace gardens were quiet once more. Selene slipped away again, seeking the comfort of the night. She found herself at the fountain, the moonlight reflecting in the water like a mirror of her own conflicted heart. She traced her fingers along the marble edge, wondering how a single glance, a single bow, could change everything. From the shadows, Cale appeared once more, his presence a steadying force in the quiet night. "You have a courage few possess," he said. "To walk these halls, to witness what you do, and to remain yourself. It is no small thing. The world would have you silent, unseen, yet here you stand, luminous and unafraid." Selene looked up at him, her heart heavy with longing and fear. "I do not want to betray my sister," she said. I do not know how to live with the truth of what I feel." Cale's hand brushed hers again, a fleeting touch that sent warmth through her entire body. "Living with truth is never easy," he said. "But the truth is stronger than fear. It will find a way whether we wish it or not. And in that truth, we may discover not just danger but freedom." Selene's breath caught. She realized that the days ahead would be filled with impossible choices, moments that would test her loyalty, courage, and heart. But one thing was certain. The bond between her and Cale had begun, and nothing, neither law nor duty, nor prophecy, could erase it. Cliffhanger. As Selene watched Cale retreat into the darkness of the palace, a shadow moved behind the fountain. She turned quickly, expecting a servant, but instead found herself facing a figure cloaked in black, their presence both familiar and threatening. The figure spoke a single word, a whisper that chilled her to the bone. "He belongs to danger, and so do you." Selene's heart raced, and she realized that the path before her was no longer one she could navigate alone. The palace was quieter than usual in the days after the wedding. Guests had returned to their homes, and the halls, once bustling with celebration, seemed to hold only shadows and whispers. Selene moved among them, careful and silent, aware that every glance, every gesture could shift the fragile balance she and Cale were weaving. The memory of the king's bow, his words, and the way he looked at her lingered in her mind like a fire she could neither ignite nor extinguish. Kyle, too, moved with purpose. Though the marriage had been completed in law, the bond that tied him to Lyra was fragile, bound by duty and expectation. He could not ignore the pull he felt toward Selene, a connection that had begun long before the wedding, before either sister had understood its significance.
And yet he remained careful,
aware that the smallest misstep could destroy everything, the palace, the kingdom, and the fragile trust that lingered between hearts. Selene found herself drawn to the training grounds, where Cale often practiced with his sword. Though the sessions were meant to hone skill and discipline, they became a place of quiet intimacy. He allowed her to watch, to learn, to share moments where duty seemed to fade and only the truth of their bond remained. "You have the courage of a queen," Cale said one evening, pausing to watch her mirror his movements. "Not the kind that the palace demands, but the kind that changes worlds." Selene felt her chest tighten. I only try to do what is right," she admitted. "I cannot betray my sister yet. I do not know if my heart will allow me to remain silent." Kyle's eyes softened. "Silence is easy. Truth is difficult. But only through truth can we ever find freedom, from duty, from fear, from the shadows that haunt us all." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Selene's thoughts drifted to the prophecy she had overheard whispered in the library long ago, that the king's heart could only be claimed by one who could stand in both light and darkness, who could face fear and desire with equal strength. She realized that perhaps she had been preparing for this moment her whole life, though she had never known it. Meanwhile, Lyra began to sense the subtle shift in the palace. The courtiers whispered about the way Kale's attention seemed to linger in places where it should not. Her smiles, once radiant and confident, faltered when her gaze fell on Selene. Though she could not yet name the source of her unease, she felt the shift, the tension that had begun to grow between the king and her sister. The sisters' bond, once unbreakable, began to strain under the weight of secrets and desires unspoken. Selene struggled with guilt, torn between love and loyalty, while Lyra's awareness of the change in Kale's behavior stirred a quiet anger she could not suppress. She sought to confront Selene, to demand answers, but every time she approached, the words dissolved into silence. There were moments when the unspoken passed between them, a glance, a gesture, a shared thought, and yet no one dared speak aloud the dangerous truth that hovered in the air. One evening, Selene wandered into the palace library, seeking solace among the ancient tomes. The scent of old parchment and waxed wood was comforting, grounding her amidst the storm of her emotions. She traced her fingers along the spines of books that held secrets of kings long dead, of battles fought and hearts lost. Kyle appeared quietly, his presence a steadying force. "You seek answers here," he said, his voice calm yet carrying weight. "Do you find them?" Selene shook her head. "Only more questions," she admitted. "How can the heart know what it wants when duty demands something else entirely?" Kyle stepped closer, lowering his voice. "The heart always knows, Selene. It may speak in whispers, in fleeting moments, and glances across a crowded room, but it speaks, and it calls to those who are brave enough to listen." Selene felt a shiver pass through her. Every word Kale spoke seemed to reach into the deepest parts of her soul, stirring a longing she had tried to suppress. She wanted to speak, to confess the pull she felt, yet fear held her tongue. She could not yet defy her sister, nor the palace, nor the destiny that seemed to press down on them all. "You will need courage," Kale continued, his gaze unwavering. "Not the courage of strength alone, but of honesty. To face the truth, to act upon it, will require all that you are." Selene nodded, though her hands trembled. She understood that the days ahead would test her in ways she could not yet imagine. Every step she took, every choice she made, would ripple through the palace, the kingdom, and the hearts of those she loved. Later that night, the palace erupted in a disturbance. A shadow moved through the corridors, quick and silent. Courtiers whispered of a potential threat, of unseen enemies, of old magic stirring once more. Kale moved swiftly, his instincts honed by years of rule and battle. Selene, despite fear, followed closely, her own courage awakening in response to the danger. They reached the grand hall, where a figure cloaked in black had slipped past the guards. Kale's voice was steady as he addressed the intruder. "Leave now," he commanded, "or face the consequences." The figure paused, and for a moment Selene felt a strange familiarity. There was something in the way they moved, in the quiet confidence that suggested knowledge beyond the ordinary, and yet before the figure could respond, they vanished into the shadows, leaving only the echo of their warning. "They will return," Kale said quietly, turning to Selene, "and when they do, we must be ready. This is not just a test of strength, but of wisdom, trust, and heart." Selene's mind raced. The palace, the kingdom, and her own feelings had become intertwined in ways she could not yet untangle. And in that moment, she realized that her bond with Kale was not merely personal. It was entwined with forces beyond her understanding, forces that could change the course of history. In the days that followed, Selene and Kale spent long hours in quiet conversation, in study, in the practice of sword and strategy. They shared knowledge, secrets, and small moments of laughter, building trust that neither could afford to reveal publicly. Every gesture, every glance carried layers of meaning that only they understood. Lyra, increasingly aware of the closeness between them, felt a mixture of jealousy, fear, and confusion. She sought counsel from the palace advisors, from whispers in the halls, from the quiet shadows that had always seemed to watch her family. And yet she could not bring herself to confront Selene directly. The bond between the sisters, though strained, was not yet broken. One evening, as Selene walked alone in the moonlit gardens, Kale appeared again. He had removed his ceremonial armor, wearing only the dark cloak of a king, and yet he carried himself with the same commanding presence. "You have grown stronger," he observed, "not just in skill but in courage, in thought, in heart. That is why I trust you." Selene felt a warmth she could not name. "I do not know if I am worthy of that trust," she admitted. I only know that. I cannot ignore what I feel. And yet I fear the consequences. Kale's eyes softened. Fear is natural. It is what makes courage meaningful. And the consequences, we cannot always control them. But we can control our choices, and that is where power lies. Celine nodded, understanding in a way she had never before. She was no longer merely a sister in the shadow of another. She was a force, a choice, a presence that could shape the fate of the king, the palace, and perhaps even the kingdom itself. Cliffhanger. As they spoke, a sudden wind swept through the garden, carrying with it a whisper of warning. From the shadows, the cloaked figure emerged once more, silent and menacing. They spoke only a single word, echoing across the marble paths. Tonight, before Selene could respond, the figure vanished, leaving only the chill of fear and the unspoken question. What threat now loomed over them, and how could she and Kale face it together? The night had fallen over the obsidian palace, wrapping its towers and spires in darkness. The moon hung low, casting a silver glow across the gardens, the fountains, and the shadowed corridors where secrets thrived. Selene moved quietly through the halls, her thoughts heavy with what had happened in recent days. The subtle tension between her and Kale, the growing unease she sensed in her sister, and the warnings whispered by the cloaked figure who had appeared twice now. Kyle waited for her in the training hall, his presence calm, yet commanding. Even in the dim candlelight, he seemed to radiate authority, a power that drew both fear and fascination. "You are here," he said simply, his voice carrying through the quiet room. "Good. There is much we must prepare for." Selene stepped forward, her fingers brushing against the hilt of her sword. "Prepare? For what?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. The shadows, the whispers, the intruder, they were signs of something larger, something that would not wait for politeness or ceremony. Kale moved closer, his dark eyes scanning the room before resting on hers. "For what has been coming for centuries," he said. "The curse of my lineage is awakening, and with it the trials that guard it. You must be ready, not only for danger but for truth." Celine's heart quickened. She had heard fragments of the curse from him, whispered words of shadowed ancestors and a heart bound by prophecy. But she had never understood its full weight until now. "What must I do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear tightening in her chest. "You must trust yourself," Kale said, his gaze unwavering. "Trust in your courage, in your heart, and in the bond we share. Only then can you stand in both light and darkness without faltering." The hours passed in quiet preparation. Selene and Kale practiced their movements, their steps synchronized, their minds working in tandem. Every strike, every parry was more than training. It was a lesson in trust, in understanding, in the silent communication of hearts. In these moments, the world beyond the palace seemed to fall away, leaving only the truth of their connection. Yet even as they moved together, the palace grew more restless. Courtiers whispered of the strange occurrences, torches that flickered despite no wind, shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally, and fleeting glimpses of a figure cloaked in black. Lyra noticed these things too, and though she could not name her fear, it grew with each passing day. Her sister's presence near Kale, the strange glances, the moments of quiet understanding, they all seemed to threaten the life she had planned. One evening, Selene stood on a balcony gazing at the distant mountains. The moonlight painted the snow-capped peaks in silver, and the wind carried a chill that bit at her skin. She felt Kale's presence before she saw him. He joined her quietly, his cloak brushing against the stone railing. "You wonder what lies ahead," he said, his voice low. "The trials will not only test your strength, Selene. They will test your heart, your loyalty, and your courage." Selene nodded, her fingers tightening around the railing. "I do not know if I can face it," she admitted. "I fear what I might lose, what I might become." Kyle reached out, resting a hand lightly on her shoulder. "Fear is natural," he said. "But fear does not control us unless we allow it. You are stronger than you believe. And you are not alone." She looked into his eyes, and for a moment the world fell away. In that gaze she saw understanding, trust, and a quiet promise that gave her courage she had not known she possessed. And yet, the weight of the upcoming trials pressed down, reminding her that every choice carried consequence. That night the cloaked figure appeared again, moving silently through the palace. Selene felt a shiver run down her spine as she sensed their presence. The same feeling of warning and danger she had felt before. Cale was by her side in an instant, his eyes scanning the darkness. "They are coming," he said, his voice calm but tense, "and we must be ready." The figure did not speak this time. Instead, it left a small folded note on the marble floor before disappearing into the shadows. Celine picked it up carefully. The words were written in a flowing, unfamiliar script. "The heart that dares must face the shadow or all will be lost." Cale's expression darkened. "The curse is stirring," he said. "It tests more than strength. It tests loyalty, trust, and the courage to act when all else seems impossible." Celine felt the weight of the words pressing on her chest. She had been prepared for challenges of skill and courage, but this was something more. It was a test of heart, of choices, of the invisible threads that bound her to Cale and to her sister. Over the next few days, Celine noticed subtle changes in the palace. Shadows seemed deeper, colder, sounds came from empty corridors. Even the courtiers moved with a quiet tension, as if the walls themselves whispered warnings. Yet through it all, Cale remained her anchor, his presence a constant reassurance that she was not alone. One evening, as they trained in the moonlit courtyard, Cale stopped suddenly. "Do you feel it?" he asked. Selina paused, her breath steadying. "The shadow?" "Yes," she said. "It is stronger now, closer," Cale nodded. "The curse seeks to divide, to test, to challenge. But you are not merely a participant. You are a choice. Your courage, your heart, your actions, they will determine the outcome." Celine looked at him, her mind racing. "And if I fail?" Cale stepped closer, his dark eyes holding hers. "Then we face the consequences together. But you will not fail. Not while you trust yourself, not while you trust us." The nights that followed were filled with quiet preparation, whispered strategies and moments of connection between Celine and Cale. Every shared glance, every subtle touch built trust and deepened the bond that neither could deny. And yet the palace itself seemed to grow darker, more oppressive, as if the shadows were aware of the choice that was forming in the hearts of the twins and the king. Lyra, meanwhile, began to confront the truth she had long avoided. She noticed the subtle glances, the way Cale's attention lingered, the quiet conversations that seemed to exclude her. Her heart twisted with jealousy, fear, and confusion. She sought counsel from advisors, from whispers in the halls, from memories of old tales about kings and the power of the heart. But even as she searched, she could not fully understand what was unfolding before her. One night, Selene wandered the halls alone, seeking clarity. The palace was silent, the air heavy with anticipation. She reached the grand hall where the shadows seemed to gather like living things, and there, standing at the far end, was the cloaked figure once more. "You cannot hide from what is coming," the figure said, their voice a whisper that carried through the empty hall. "The curse will awaken. The heart that fears must act or all will be lost." Celine's heart pounded. "Who are you?" she demanded, though part of her knew the answer was not simple. The figure stepped closer, and for a moment, she thought she could see the faint outline of a familiar shape beneath the cloak. But before she could react, the figure vanished into the darkness, leaving only the echo of their warning. Cale arrived moments later, his presence steady and unwavering. "The time is near," he said. "The trials are approaching, and we must be ready. The curse will challenge us, test us, and demand choices. But together, we can face it." Celine nodded, feeling a strange mixture of fear and determination. She understood now that her path was no longer her own. Every decision, every step, every heartbeat would shape not only her destiny but the fate of the king, the palace, and perhaps even the kingdom itself. And as she stood there, the moonlight casting silver across the grand hall, Celine realized a truth that both frightened and emboldened her. The shadow of the curse was growing, and only courage, trust, and the strength of the heart could face it. Cliffhanger. Just as she turned to follow Cale, the palace trembled. From the distance, a deep, unnatural sound echoed through the halls like the growl of a beast bound by ancient magic. The torches flickered violently, and shadows danced along the walls as if alive. Cale's eyes narrowed, his hand tightening on the hilt of his sword. "It begins," he said, his voice low and urgent. Celine felt the pulse of danger in her veins, and she knew that the trials of heart, courage, and destiny had arrived, and there would be no turning back. The palace trembled under a sky darkened by storm clouds, the wind howling through the towers like a chorus of restless spirits. Shadows shifted unnaturally along the marble corridors, as though the very walls of the obsidian palace were alive, aware of the approaching trial. Celine stood at the balcony, the silver moon struggling to pierce the storm, her heart racing not with fear alone, but with the weight of destiny pressing upon her shoulders. Cale emerged silently, his dark cloak billowing behind him, his eyes scanning the horizon with the intensity of a predator and the wisdom of a king. "The time has come," he said, his voice low but resolute. "The curse awakens fully tonight, and with it every choice, every loyalty, every bond will be tested." Celine turned to him, her chest tight with emotion. "I have trained, I have prepared, but I do not know if courage alone is enough." Cale stepped closer, his hand brushing hers in a quiet gesture of reassurance. "Courage is never enough by itself," he said. "But courage combined with trust, with love, with honesty, that is a force no curse can bind." The distant echo of the cloaked figure's warning still lingered in her mind. The heart that dares must face the shadow, or all will be lost. Celine realized now that the shadow was not merely darkness, nor a simple enemy. It was the trial of truth, the confrontation of fear, the reckoning that tested the very essence of heart and spirit. Suddenly, the storm broke fully. Lightning struck the towers, illuminating the courtyard in jagged bursts of silver. The wind tore through the palace, rattling doors and windows, and the sound of the ancient curse seemed to resonate in the stones themselves. Celine felt the pull of the magic, the weight of history, and the urgency of choice pressing in on her from all sides. Kyle led her down the grand staircase, their footsteps echoing in unison against the marble. "The shadow seeks to divide," he said. "It will try to separate us, to turn sister against sister, to confuse loyalty with desire. We must remain steadfast." As they reached the main hall, the air thickened with power. Shadows danced and twisted unnaturally, moving like living things while the torches flickered as if resisting the darkness. Lyra was there, standing frozen in the center of the hall, her face pale but determined. "Celine," she whispered, a tremor in her voice. What is happening?" Celine stepped forward, her gaze firm. "The curse has awakened," she said. "It tests us all, our hearts, our loyalty, our courage. We must face it together, not apart." Lyra's eyes filled with confusion and fear, yet beneath it a flicker of understanding shone. She had seen the bond between Celine and Cale, subtle and unspoken, and though jealousy and fear had shadowed her, she also recognized the truth. "Then we face it together," she said, her voice steadying. "As sisters, as family, as part of this kingdom." The shadows surged, coiling and twisting around the pillars and along the floor. A deep, resonant voice echoed through the hall, ancient and commanding. "Only the heart that stands in both light and darkness may survive. Only the truth of loyalty and love can break the chain of the curse." Celine felt the force of the words reverberate through her very being. She looked at Cale, their hands brushing again, and then at Lyra, whose resolve had strengthened. In that moment, Celine understood that the trial was not merely one of strength or skill, but of unity, of courage, and of heart. The shadows surged forward, a living wave of darkness, seeking to engulf them. Cale stepped in front, his sword drawn, the metal gleaming in the flashes of lightning. "Hold steady," he commanded. "Do not let fear guide you. Stand together." Celine and Lyra joined him, their presence resolute. Though neither carried a weapon as grand as Cale's, their courage and unity created a force that pushed back against the encroaching darkness. Together they formed a triangle of strength, sister, king, sister, bound not by fear but by trust and the unspoken bonds of love. The shadows writhed and twisted, testing each of them individually. Celine felt illusions arise before her eyes, visions of failure, of Cale slipping away, of Lyra turning against her. The fear clawed at her heart, but she remembered his words, the truth of their bond, the trust that had been forged in quiet moments of connection. She reached out with her heart, anchoring herself to both Kyle and her sister, and the illusions dissolved like mist in sunlight. Cale faced the shadows directly, his movements precise, his gaze unwavering. "Celine, Lyra, now," he shouted. The sisters stepped forward together, their hands clasped, and a beam of light seemed to erupt from the unity of their hearts, a force that cut through the shadows with radiant intensity. The darkness shrieked, recoiling, and the hall was filled with a brilliant, almost blinding glow. The curse had tested them, probed them, sought to divide them, but it had not accounted for the strength of courage tempered by love and loyalty. When the light faded, the hall was silent. The shadows had vanished, leaving only the flickering torches and the storm still raging outside. Celine, Cale, and Lyra stood together, breathing heavily, hearts pounding with the thrill of victory and the relief of survival. Cale turned to Celine, his dark eyes shining with emotion. "You have done more than survive," he said. "You have faced the truth of your heart, the shadow of fear, and emerged stronger than I could have imagined. You are extraordinary." Celine felt her cheeks flush, a mixture of pride, relief, and something deeper stirring in her chest. We did it together," she said, glancing at her sister, who nodded with quiet understanding. Lyra stepped forward, placing a hand on Celine's shoulder. "I see it now," she said. "The bond between you and Cale. It is not a threat, but a truth. I may have feared it, but I understand. We all have roles to play, and love, courage, and loyalty are stronger than fear." The storm outside began to subside, leaving only the soft sound of rain against the marble windows. The palace, once a place of tension and fear, felt lighter, freer, as if the lifting of the curse had cleansed not only the walls but the hearts within them. Cale stepped closer to Selene, his hand finding hers once more. "There is more to come," he said softly. "Challenges, yes, but now we face them with strength, with unity, with trust, and I would be honored if you stood by my side, not just in duty but in choice." Celine's heart swelled, a mixture of joy, relief, and love. "I choose," she whispered, her voice steady and certain. "I choose to stand with you, to face whatever comes. Together." Cale's lips curved in a small, rare smile, and he bowed slightly, a gesture of respect and recognition that carried more meaning than words ever could. "Then let it be so," he said. Lyra stepped back, her eyes bright, and for the first time in days she smiled genuinely. "Then let us rebuild what the curse sought to destroy," she said. "Together we will strengthen this kingdom, this family, and the bonds that hold us all." In the days that followed, the palace returned to life, though with a new sense of clarity and purpose. The courtiers whispered of the strange events, but none could deny the visible change in the king, the sisters, and the palace itself. Celine and Cale moved with quiet strength, their bond now known to no one but themselves, yet visible in every glance, every shared gesture, every moment of unspoken understanding. Lyra and Celine found their relationship renewed, stronger than ever. They had faced fear, jealousy, and uncertainty, and emerged with a deeper understanding of each other, and of the bonds that could withstand even the darkest shadows. The kingdom itself seemed to breathe with renewed energy, as though the lifting of the curse had freed not only the palace but the land beyond. Fields appeared greener, rivers clearer, and the people, sensing change, moved with hope and confidence. And in the quiet of the palace, when the storm had passed and the night was still, Celine stood with Cale on the balcony once more. The stars shone brightly, free of clouds, and the moon cast a silver glow upon their faces. Cale turned to her, his eyes reflecting the calm after the storm. "This is only the beginning," he said softly. "But with courage, truth, and heart, we will face everything that comes, together." Celine smiled, feeling the weight of fear, doubt, and uncertainty lift from her shoulders. "Together," she echoed. The wind whispered through the towers, carrying a promise of future trials, but also a certainty that love, courage, and unity could conquer even the darkest curses. And for the first time in a long time, the Obsidian Palace was filled not with fear but with hope, light in the quiet strength of hearts that had chosen truth.